Thanks for checking out the X-Dome pitching guide video. The X-Dome has a unique design where the fly, the inner, and the poles all connect to the same 4 points, which makes it simple and intuitive to pitch. You can pitch the tent fly first to keep the inner tent dry during setup in the rain, but you can also pitch it inner tent first for setup on those beautiful summer nights. You can also pitch the tent combined as one unit or pitch the pieces separately. Either way, whatever you want to do, the tent can probably do it simply and intuitively. In this video, what we're going to do is quickly show you the basic pitch of the tent, and then we'll go through that process in more detail to show you everything you need to know. Then we're going to show you how to pitch the inner tent first if you want to do it that way, and then we'll show you how to beef it up for stormy weather. Lastly, we'll show you how to pack up the tent. Let's get into it. The typical way to pitch the X-Dome is to throw out the tent fly, assemble the pole set, connect the pole set at the 4 corners of the fly, and then connect the crossbar and clips. The inner tent may already be connected inside if you left it there last time, but if not, you can clip the inner tent into place. So to pitch your X-Dome tent, of course, you're going to need to have your X-Dome tent with the fly, the inner, and the poles. And then there are a few optional things you may want to have. Typically, you're going to want to have some tent stakes. The tent can pitch with 0 stakes, but of course, typically you're going to want to have at least a couple stakes to anchor the tent so it doesn't blow away. More typically, you're going to want to have 4 or 5 stakes so you can stake out the 4 corners of the tent, which just lets you pull the whole tent tighter. And you can use up to 15 stakes for the tent. Aside from stakes, you may need some guy line if the tent doesn't require any, but there are ways you can add optional guy lines in stormy conditions, so you may want some of that. And you may want to have the ground sheet, again, that's optional. To get started, throw out the tent fly and then assemble the pole set. The pole set is fully interconnected, so it all clips together with no separate pieces to keep track of. Now, orient the pole set so that the spine portion runs lengthwise down the tent, and then connect the pole set to the fly at all 4 corners. So with the fly thrown out and the pole set assembled and added to the 4 corners, now you can just clip the fly up to the pole set. You can do this in essentially any order. There's clips all over the fly, and then there's 2 more little loops that the ends of the pole crossbar are going to connect into. You could have the crossbar above or below. It doesn't matter. It's slightly easier if it's above, and it's also slightly easier if you do the crossbar first. But again, it doesn't really matter, and you can do this in any order. So now you've got the fly and pole set assembled. Now it's time to think about the inner tent. The inner tent may already be connected inside if you left it in there last time, in which case all you'll need to do is reconnect the inner tent at the 4 corners, putting the pole tip through the corners of the inner as well. If you did remove the inner tent, then of course you'll need to re-add it. And to re-add it, you're going to have the wide end of the floor on the left side and the narrow end on the right on the vestibule side. So all you need to do is lay out that inner tent, connect it at the 4 corners, and then do up all the buckles to fully connect the inner tent. So now you've got the complete tent assembled with the fly, the poles, and the inner. At this point, you can refine the position of the tent, move it around if you need to. And then something that's nice to do, not required, but nice, is to stake the 4 corners of the tent. What it's going to do, if you stake the 4 corners and you pull all 4 corners out, it's just going to add more tension around the tent. So if it's windy, the walls are just going to be tighter. So it's just a nice thing to do if the weather's a bit tougher. And then the last thing you can do is decide how you want to set up the vestibule door. So normally you're going to access the tent through the large side here and have that rolled back. And then at the smaller side of the door, you've got 3 options. First of all, you can stake it out. But alternatively, if you don't want to use a stake, you can use a trekking pole where the handle goes up here and the tip just goes through that same loop. Extend the pole and it can hold the vestibule door without any stake there. Or alternatively, if you don't want to do that, if you want to fully open the side of the tent, You can also roll back this side of the door, and then you're still going to have a protected awning type area over the vestibule. So even without that stake, you still got a lot of protection for gear stored in here. The X-Dome is one of the simplest tents to pitch, but still sometimes people can have issues. And so what we're going to do in this troubleshooting section is quickly look at two of the more common issues that people sometimes run into, show you how you can identify them and how you can easily solve them. So those two issues are, first of all, people finding that the crossbar is quite tight and hard to connect. And the second issue, people finding looseness almost anywhere on the tent. It could be a loose fly that's maybe sagging and sticking to the interior. It could be that the interior feels loose where the floor is not tight. All of that general looseness usually just comes back to one simple root cause, which we're going to show you how you can easily fix. So for the first issue of the crossbar feeling like it's hard to connect, that's not actually really an issue in the sense that as long as you're not being unreasonable with it, even if it's a bit tight, it's fine to connect that way. But if you do want it to be easier to connect the crossbar, all you have to do is connect the crossbar earlier in the pitching process. As you continue to pitch the tent and do it more and more clips everywhere, maybe tighten the corners, the more other things that you do, all of that is taking away slack and making everything tighter. So if you're connecting the crossbar as the very last step, it is going to be tighter. So to make it easier, just connect the crossbar earlier in the process. One other minor thing that also helps is if you put the crossbar above the main arc instead of below, that also makes it a little bit easier to connect because it's bending into a bit more of a curve. So now for the second issue of general looseness on the tent, whether that's loose walls on the fly that might be hanging in and touching the interior, or whether it's a loose interior where maybe the floor is all loose and baggy. The root cause of all of that boils back down to the fly corners being adjusted too tight before the tent is staked out. The fly corners are over tightened. So normally the poles here have a spring tension that's going to be pulling out on the interior and the fly, making everything nice and tight. But what can happen is sometimes when the tent is not yet staked out, people over tighten that fly corner thinking they're making the fly tighter, but actually all it does is it pulls the pole inwards and makes the interior loose. So right now you could see both the interior and the fly are looking pretty good. But if I come along and I actually try to tighten this fly more, it pulled that pull corner inward by a few inches and just made the interior all loose and baggy. So that's the problem that you see. It makes the interior loose, and it's also going to make the fly looser in the middle of the walls. So the better way to do it is to start off with the fly loose. Now the poles are going to spring out, make everything nice and tight. Then you can lock that in by staking out the tent. And now you have something to tension against. So now once the tent's staked out, now you can pull the fly tight without taking all that tension off the interior. So again, keep the fly corners loose until after the tent is staked out. If you aren't going to be staking out the tent, then it's the same thing, except there won't be stakes to pull against, so you just have to be a bit more gentle when you tension it out, snug everything up, but you won't be able to crank it as tight. Now for an inner first pitch of the X-Dome, you could pitch the entire inner tent all by itself, but you might also just want to roll back a portion of the fly to reveal some of the inner. That way, if you're not so sure about the weather, you can quickly redeploy the fly. The key concept either way is that the inner and the fly each of those can connect to the pole set at all the same points. So if you want to have the inner instead at certain areas, you just disconnect the fly and connect the inner there instead. So for example, if I wanted to reveal the corner of this tent, I can just loosen the fly off and disconnect it. And then I can disconnect the fly at a few points. And instead of the inner tent being connected to the fly, I can just connect it around the pole. Disconnect it from the fly, connect it around the pole. And you can go all the way back here. You could go further. This is a nice arrangement here where you have a corner of the tent exposed, something like that. And then if bad weather was rolling in, you could very quickly disconnect the inner tent and redeploy the fly back down. And just connect it back up. If you do want to pitch the complete inner tent all by itself, then the process is essentially the same as how you pitch the fly. What you do is lay out the interior of the tent, clip the pole set to the four corners, and then connect the interior at all the same buckles and clips. If you do need to add the fly later, then you'll need to disconnect those clips while leaving it connected at the four corners, and then you can add in the fly by also connecting the fly to the four corners and clipping it up instead. Now, if you are pitching your X-Dome in stormy conditions, there are a few different things that you might want to do. So if we imagine that the wind here is coming from the right across the frame like this, what you're going to want to do when you throw out the tent is, of course, you're going to want to stake it down before you just leave it there and have it blow away. So what you should do is throw out the tent fly and then stake down the upwind, at least the upwind side of the tent, if not the whole base of the tent. Depending on if it's just a mild wind, you could stake those two upwind corners. If it's more severe winds, you could stake the middle point on the inside as well, and you could go around the tent and stake all the points if you'd like. Next, assemble the pole set and clip it to the four corners of the tent. With the poles connected at the corners, now you can clip the rest of the fly up to the poles. This is going to add wind drag, so it is best to start at the upwind end of the tent. If the wind is quite serious, at the same time you are connecting the clips, it can be important to also immediately add guy lines to support the pole set. The guy lines can be connected at the corners of the tent, to the ends of the crossbar, and to the hubs on each end. If it is very windy, it can be handy to have the guy lines pre-connected. Now for the crossbar guy lines, what these are supposed to do is they're supposed to guard against deflection from side winds on the tent. You might have a wind pushing the tent sideways, where this guy line is anchoring your tent against that. So what you want to do here is connect these guy lines, and if you're doing this, you're going to want to do both sides of the crossbar so they're opposing. And then what you want to do is snug them up so that they are tight, but you don't want to be distorting the tent. You don't want to start pulling the tent out of position and have the whole tent sort of pre-leaning to one side or the other. Just evenly snug them up. Don't need to make it crazy tight. Just get it snug, both sides, so that the tent's going to be more sturdy from those side winds. If you also have the trekking pole supports in here, it's insanely strong. So now at the corners, you're going to have one or two guy outs depending on the model of tent that you have, and these can do two different things. Of course, like any guy out, they can be staked out to anchor the tent against being deflected by the wind, but the second thing they can do is serve as an extra connection between the fly and the pole set to better lock everything together. So the ideal way to use these guy outs is you can simply wrap them around and add your cord, but even better is to pass them through themselves, which is just going to lock everything super together, and then have the guy line deployed in the appropriate direction. When you connect these guy lines, what you want to do is think about the type of forces you're guarding against. If you're getting snow loads on the tent, they're actually pushing down and trying to bulge. The tent's going to be trying to bulge outwards here. So if you connect a guy line here and you're cranking the tent outwards, you're almost helping the snow to distort the tent. In snowy conditions, this extra connection point helps keep everything sturdier and actually makes it harder to compress the tent, but you don't really actually need the cord to be doing very much. Conversely, in windy conditions, you do want the cord and you want to have that facing into the wind. So if it's a wind coming here from the end, you're facing in like this, so you're guarding against it. If your guy line's in some other direction, it's not really doing anything to avoid deflection from the wind. So the key ideas here are to have the guy lines facing into the wind, use all four guy lines if you're going to be using them so they can be tensioned against each other, and when you do that, they should be symmetrical from each other so they can be pulling off of each other. And then the last spot you can put some guy outs is on the pole set hubs. These are great because they're a direct connection to the pole set, super solid, and these are great for winds that are going to be hitting the end of the tent. Stake them out, aligning against the end of the tent, ideally one on both sides, and you can add a lot of strength against end winds. Now, when you add the guy lines, that's really how you do that, how you tighten them, that's really beyond the scope of this video. But what I like to do as a quick tip is to add the guy lines with a girth hitch where you have a loop in the end and you pass the tail through. That way you can quickly add them when they're needed, but you can also take them off easily for times when they're not needed, so they're not tangling up and just in your way on day-to-day use. And then for the length adjustment on the guy lines, you can simply use fixed length lines where you stake out wherever they pull tight, but it is nice to have some adjustment, and for that you can use knots or a variety of different tensioners. There's a number of great videos on YouTube on how you can use those different adjustment systems. So with your tent essentially assembled, the next thing to decide is if you want to add the optional trekking pole supports. The tent is quite sturdy without them, so rarely should this be needed. But if you do want the strongest possible pitch, you can add your trekking poles at either end of the crossbar. Essentially what that does is it completes the crossbar into an extra strong third arc of the tent. The trekking poles are opposing, so it's strong both vertically and horizontally. It's extremely strong, but again, rarely needed. If you do want to do this, essentially what you're going to do is take your trekking pole and add the tip of it to the same loop as you would stake out the sidewall of the tent. So you're going to stake out this, you're going to put your trekking pole loop in there, and then you're going to extend your trekking pole so the handle's up at the top, and then just extend that trekking pole so that it's tight, while also snugging up the stake point at the base. You should do that on both sides of the tent if you're going to do it. If you are adding the trekking pole at the back of the tent, that's easier to do before the inner tent is in place on our 1+ model. But if you do need to add it later, it's no problem to just disconnect a few clips, and then you can put it in place and reconnect those clips.
Now lastly, keep in mind that all of these different things are tools that should be part of an overall strategy for how you use the tent in stormy conditions. That strategy should start with where you pitch the tent, where if it's stormy, you should be looking for a sheltered site. Even if your tent can handle more extreme conditions, this is a pretty sturdy tent, but still, if it's extreme conditions, absolutely you should be seeking out more of a sheltered site where you're going to have a better sleep and you're just going to have a higher safety margin. And then in that sheltered site, pitch the tent how we described, and then use these tools as is appropriate for the conditions. So for snowy conditions, the trekking poles are going to help a lot if you're getting into pretty substantial snow loads. Whereas in windy conditions, if it's a side wind, then the trekking pole supports help quite a bit, and so do the crossbar guy lines, and the corners help quite a bit as well. For end winds, the hub guy lines are your best option, but also the corners are important to deploy. And if it's generally just windy all over, then you can simply deploy everything.
When it comes time to pack up the tent, the first thing to decide is if you're going to leave the inner tent connected inside or you're going to remove it. I would leave the inner tent connected inside if everything's dry, and it's just going to be that much simpler and quicker next time. But if you've got a wet fly from rain or condensation where you want to keep the interior dry, then you can disconnect those clips. Next, take down the fly by disconnecting it from the pole set at the corners and clips and unstaking it. Now to pack up the pole set, basically you can just fold it up. It doesn't really matter which way to do it. But if you want the most consistent pack length, what you can do is disconnect all 4 legs from the top of each hub and just fold up that leg while leaving the hub connected to the spine. So you're not disconnecting the hub from the spine, you're just pulling the legs off. Do those 2 legs. And then you can break the spine and do the same thing on the other half of the tent. Each leg gets folded up. And lastly, you can disconnect the crossbar. Now the last step is just to fold and roll up the fly. What I like to do is grab the 4 corners of the fly and just fold them together. Basically what you're trying to do is fold up the fly in a way that it's about the same length as the poles, so you can just roll up the whole tent together. Here we show just the fly and poles packed together, but you can pack the tent parts in a variety of arrangements, including keeping the entire tent together, packing the poles separately so the rest of the tent can pack shorter, or packing the inner tent separately to keep it dry if the fly is wet. Thanks for using the X-Dome, and good luck on your next adventure.